Hello, good creatures, and welcome. My name's Petrina Calder, and I'm here with my friend Nate.
Yes, and I'm Nate Bolding, and today on The Creatures We Become, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We had a listener reach out with some really great questions following episode 1, where we discussed the book Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus. And we wanted to record a little mini episode to respond, since we imagine that many of you probably have similar questions.
hmm In episode 1, Nate and I shared some of our personal experiences. And so while my journey was characterized by starting in the mental and emotional domains of life and really only coming to the physical domain and focusing on my fitness later in life, Nate's journey was the opposite. You started in the physical domain and then went on a journey through the mental domain and into the emotional. But despite our journeys starting from different places, we've ended up in a very similar place, which is that we have this very holistic view of human health and personal growth, which is kind of the basis for our whole podcast.
Yeah, and it's the yin and yang of me and Petrina's journey that allows us to be the leaders that we are. And we conceptualize this holistic analogy between a car and a driver, with the car visualization on being the external environment, but having a big effect on the internal environment. And then the driver, that being the internal environment, having a large effect on the external environment. That you need to have a good running car and you need to take care of it. And you also have to have a driver that can conceptualize where they'd like to go.
Exactly. Just like if you've got a really well-running car, but the driver's impaired, you're going to run it into the ditch. But on the other hand, you could be a Formula One driver with a ton of skill, but you're going to be limited by your car's ability to perform in that case. So while it seems that the differences in our starting points and kind of how we discussed that in episode 1, and what it looks like to do hard things in different domains, that seems to be what prompted my friend Joe to reach out to us with some of his questions.
And we want to start by thanking Joe, the curiosity and willingness to ask the question. With one person asking a question, there are probably a lot of other people wondering the same thing. And we want to thank Joe for asking the question, and we want to let others know to feel free to ask these type of questions, because we could do these type of answers in the future.
Absolutely. It is part of our mission statement for this podcast to encourage more people to invest in their own personal development, including exercise. And so today we hope to break down some of the assumptions that might get in the way of people taking those first steps.
So let's get started and find out, when we resolve the tension between the internal and external domains of our existence, who might the creatures we become.
Love it. Thank you, Nate. So Joe reached out to us with a few questions, all around the theme of the tension between the physical and then the mental and emotional domains. Like me, he's at a stage in his journey where he's invested a lot of time and energy in personal development of his mental and emotional domains, but he's at a point where he's not necessarily translating into the physical domain the things he has learned. So he's able to do hard things in the mental and emotional domains, but it's not necessarily making the transition into the physical. And so we're going to respond to a few different components of his questions, kind of one at a time. Now, the first question that came up is Joe was asking, is it true that if you're taking care of yourself physically, that you already have the right mindset to take care of yourself mentally and emotionally? What do you think, Nate?
So we broke this down into a couple different ways. And it's like, if you're taking care of yourself physically, will you have the right mindset to take care of yourself mentally and emotionally? And like, when we're conceptualizing the thing like the car, it's a little bit more integrated than that. Like, we don't have this clear separation between the internal and external environments, but we do have a very, very complete connection between the internal and external environment. So when we take care of ourselves physically, we're going to put ourselves in a really good place to take care of ourselves mentally. We're going to have different crossovers in how we think and how we feel and how we respond to stress. And then the coping mechanisms that we've developed over that period of time, taking care of our physical self. So, it's going to be true that if you take care of yourself physically, you're going to take care of yourself. Like, you're going to not only take care of yourself physically, it's going to have all these crossovers to your internal environment as well. So it is true that when you take care of yourself physically, you're going to take care of yourself mentally. But just like the car, there's going to be some deeper underlyings to the ways we think and feel and how we respond to certain things in our environment, certain conditioning as a child for certain scenarios that we've developed over adulthood, and then how we live in the world, where it's like you could very well have a good car and a good body that's functioning well, and that we developed really good coping mechanisms through exercise, and we're in a pretty good place. We could have some underlying internal necessarily drivers or experiences that could really lay, I would say, a negative landscape for us in the future. Where I believe if we take care of ourselves physically, we're going to be in a pretty good place. But I like to play it out like some of these things that condition us, so that when we're younger and we've had these certain scenarios that condition us through a certain layout or a certain way to respond in a certain scenario, and then let's say how we my brain just goes to attachment things, because that's what I've been working on a lot lately. But say we could have developed this certain way of attaching to loved ones, and then that might not have played out too disastrous for us earlier on, but then as we live through the same cycles over and over again, a lot of times what ends up happening is you sort of seek the familiarity of a situation from the past. So then you could continue to relive the same nightmares or negative circumstances from the past without necessarily really figuring out what's going on. And you could just continue to live the same fate and over again. So you could have a really good body and have a good frame of mind and be in a relatively good place, but you could find yourself somewhere that you didn't necessarily want to go. So I think, in a long story short, it's definitely true. If you take care of yourself physically, you're going to be in a good place for everything else in your existence. But there's some nuance into the underlying things of how we respond in our internal environment.
I would agree. I think there's this saying, I'm probably going to butcher it, but I have seen it, is that a healthy man has a thousand problems, but an unhealthy man has one problem. Because as soon as you don't have your health, then that is the only problem that you have, because it becomes such a limiting factor. Having said that, though, somebody who does have their health can have a thousand problems, right? And so I think you're right, Nate, that having those good habits, and self-care routines sets you up for really great success in the mental and emotional domains as well. I often am teaching my clients about emotion regulation and about how important those kinds of basic self-care things, like, are you drinking enough water? Have you eaten something nutritious lately? Are you sleeping well? Those things are really, really important for managing your emotions. If you're hungry, if you're tired, or if you're unwell, your capacity for managing your emotions is going to be significantly diminished. And so it is true that people who are taking care of themselves physically have a really great foundation from which to do that other work, like you have talked about. Like, the physical alone is not going to get into some of those more issues that can come up that are more specific to the mental or emotional domain. So, for example, you brought up an example of working through your own attachment history, and in order to improve the health of your relationships. Working out alone is not going to do that for you. And so, having said that, there's some skills that transfer the other way as well. So while having a good physical foundation sets you up well for that mental and emotional work, there's also some good things that can come from that mental and emotional domain that set you up for the physical stuff. And I think that was one of the big take-home messages in Steve Magnus's book, Do Hard Things, is about how actually being able to regulate your emotions is super important for performance of physical and athletic endeavors too.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think it's interesting that I like how that you brought up one of basically the first book that the questions were all, because it makes me think of something. I always go to like more of the extreme ends, but I think about that performer who was always throwing up
Yeah.
before a race, and how it's like, that person's in a pretty good car, like they're probably in pretty good physical shape, but then they're having some sort of association that's putting them in such a big fight or flight response that they're vomiting before every race, and that just a simple tool like asking her to when are you going to throw up? Okay, this happens every time. Okay, 12:10, that's when you're going to throw up so we can get on to the race. And then that predictability of it didn't, the first time ever, she didn't have a pre-race throw up. And I think that's a very good representation of how some of these things in the development of good skills for emotional regulation are quite important, and you can still have a good physical experience or a good physical body and still fall victim to some pretty strong internal environment stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if we move on to question 2, I'm going to break this down in a couple ways. I'll let Petrina lead the response, and then I'm going to kind of systematically move through through it the way my brain works. So the second part of Joe's question was, what does the research say about those who struggle to take the smallest of steps on a journey towards their physical health? And then what does that say about how they're going to be able to tackle emotional mental work? And if they feel like they're putting in the effort, could they still be successful, or are they going to still be successful?
Yeah, it is such a great and nuanced question. And so I first want to just kind of validate how normal it is to struggle with this stuff. Like getting started and changing your habits is really, really difficult because the nature of habits is that they're habitual. We don't have to think about them, they happen automatically. And often we have designed our lifestyles around, like those habits have emerged in the context of a whole environment and lifestyle with different cues and social supports that keep them in place. And changing that system is really, really hard. I always think about the principles of inertia that a body in motion wants to stay in motion, but a body at rest wants to stay at rest. And the most difficult part of changing the state of something, if you were a body at rest, getting it into motion is the hard part. Once you're in motion, maintaining the motion is a whole lot easier than it is to get started. And so it is just really normal to struggle with taking those first steps. And I want to validate that first. I think the other piece I'll just touch on briefly, and then I would like to pass it over to you, Nate, because I know you have a lot of experience with this. But I think that from that mental and emotional perspective, I think that sometimes, and maybe it's my own bias because I know it's true for me, is that when you are more comfortable in the mental and emotional domains than you are in the physical domains, sometimes just continuing to dig in that garden, the place where you feel competent, is a form of avoidance. Like, I know I've got work to do in the physical domain, but that feels so overwhelming and I don't feel competent and I don't know where to begin and it feels really uncomfortable. And so I'm just going to keep tilling the same soil in the mental and emotional domains over and over again. And so I would also encourage anybody who might be stuck in that pattern, which is certainly the pattern that I was in, to kind of scrutinize, like, okay, is digging in this garden, the mental and emotional garden, am I continuing to bear fruit by doing this labor? Or should I be, is this a form of avoidance and that really I need to start turning some of these efforts towards the physical? So, Nate, based on your experience, what do you know about the struggle to start?
Well, I like what you're talking about there, because you do just tend to stay in the zone that you're comfortable in, and I think. But I like the avoidance topic as well, because emotional stress and physical stress are very, very different things. Like when you go through physical stress, you're going to have an internal response to it. And if you go through an internal stress, you're going to have an external response to it. These things are really connected. And I think from this question, going into sort of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system is relevant. If we put ourselves into a fight or flight response, our body's mobilizing energy. We're getting ready to fight. We're getting ready to run. We can have an external situation that then puts us into an internal fight or flight response, but we could also have just an internally generated stress response that's going to play out to an external stress.
Yeah.
What I like about you touching on that is then if we're only doing a lot of emotional work, we're getting conditioned to looking within. But if we don't do any physical work, we're not going to have any translation to going through physical work. And I'm going to explain why and sort of the second part of my question, or the answer I have for that one. Um, but actually, maybe it just makes sense to sort of touch on it there, is if you are conditioned to looking within, you aren't getting conditioned to the external stimuli of training. And there's a couple different stresses related to training. Like if we're just playing it out to three, if we talk about resistance training, and we're putting our body in a position to put out force and having something challenging to us, and then we're getting close to muscular failure, that's a specific type of stress that if you're not resistance training is going to possibly feel like pain. Like it's gonna, if we're not used to it, we're not used to putting out that much force. Or then if you have a long endurance output, if you're not used to putting out long endurance related tasks, not 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 60 minutes, 3 hours, etc., that's a long played out stress. Resistance training is going to deplete us immediately. It's hard, fast, we get to recover from it. But a long endurance task is very low output. That's going to stretch out over time. And let's say if we just break it on those two continuums, if you're not used to either one of those physical stresses, you're not accustomed to them, and they're going to feel like stress. So we could have all the internal work done possible. When we get into the gym or we get into training, we're not going to be used to those type of physical stresses. You're going to have, I'd say, a good tool set to deal with the internal environment, possibly, but sometimes we have some underlying associations with exercise that can kind of be another part to this coin, where if we've had a negative experience in the past with exercise, we associate an internal environment with that external stress. So you could be perceiving it as more stressful than it actually is. A little bit of a tangent, but it does answer the question. Now, if we're thinking about a couple there, what I think about is, what does the research say about people who struggle to take journeys on physical health? The research is not a good place to look at this. It's actually, I would say, a graveyard. The research gives us very, very specific understanding about a given scenario, but then there's a lot of things associated with exercise that are much, much bigger than a very specific thing. If we know that this one thing plays out to this specific response to this given population with all of these variables, versus what's the commonality between a theme of people implementing new exercise. On the research side, they might tell you not to use physical interventions for weight loss because the adherence to it is extremely, extremely low. Now, people are successful, so we're not going to look at the research there. Let's move to the next part. What does this say on how they're going to be able to tackle, if they can tackle emotional work, how are they going to be able to tackle physical work? If you're tackling emotional work, probably pretty good. I'm hoping that we've worked through maybe some of our negative associations with exercise. But like on your side, if we're avoiding it, we might not have done anything in the internal environment that could positively affect how we're going to handle the external stress of training. So it's not going to really help you there. Are they going to be successful? Well, 80% of people tend to be unsuccessful. So there is 20% of people who are going to be successful. How much internal work you've done on the inside is not going to translate very well to the external type. Like it could put you in a place where we can be more successful laying the foundation, but there's going to be some stuff we're going to cover that is going to be much more important than doing specific internal work in order to start implementing proper and adhering to exercise and nutritional interventions.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that piece about the research too, because I think you and I are both evidence-based practitioners in how we support people with behavior change. And yet we're also really quick to acknowledge there are real limitations with the research, which is um, primarily that humans are really complicated. And so the nature of research, in order to be good quality research, they have to be really hyper specific in operationalizing and isolating specific variables. And so you'll get these results that don't necessarily translate to the how does that fit into the whole of the system of the human being. And so I think it's not that we ignore the research. I think the research is important, and at the same time, it needs to be tempered with experience in working with humans and how that piece of information fits into the bigger picture of the person and their lifestyle. I think the other thing is that the research can be really disheartening. Like you say, the research shows that the vast majority of people are not going to be successful. And yet you and I would not discourage anybody from
Mhm.
like not trying on the basis of the research shows you're probably going to fail. So, you may as well not bother. Absolutely not, because we know that there are things that can help set a person up for success. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what some of those things are. So, the last part of Joe's question was about asking, why is it that some people can have no problem with doing the deep emotional work? So, for example, sorting through their issues in therapy, but that very same person is going to struggle to apply that grit and determination that they can show in therapy. They're going to struggle to apply that grit and determination in their physical efforts, like working out.
Yeah. So kind of we branch from the second question to the third question here pretty one on one. It's because we like the internal stress is interesting because when we're doing internal work, we're kind of looking within, but we're not doing anything hard per se in relation to an external stimulus. Like we're creating internal hard in order to work through associations in the internal environment over time. That can be a sort of interesting thing perceptual, like perception wise, because it's like this, we're going within and we're taking through these layers of an onion to get like deeper and deeper within, to work through deeper and deeper associations with like different versions of ourselves. Like we're trying to work all the way down to like what did little Nate have to deal with when he was like 6 years old. It's like, but it's not hard from an aspect of something like an outside circumstance within. So we have to do a lot of work, and it is difficult, and it can be very, very, very difficult. And I would say most people tend to stay away from the actual internal work that needs to be done. We can talk about our problems all day, but without going into these things and trying to break cycles that we've lived over and over again, that can be what the hard work is. So then you have to kind of take that internal work we've done and we have to take it to the external environment, which I would say that's when we start to kind of get hard. But it's still an internal hard. It's like, say we've done this work in therapy, and then now we've played it out to a real life scenario. It's almost like, I like to think like video game. It's like there's like a text box, and it's like the same way we've done 30,000 different times. And it's like, you have to just, no, today. And then it's like this, no, until you break this cycle. And I talk about this all the time with people, where I'll get into part two, when they're trying to implement exercise adherence and nutritional interventions. I like to look at the nervous system like a hill. And I'm from the north, and we used to go sliding down crazy ice hills. And this is how I imagine it: is you have yourself a hill, and the first snow, you go down this one slot, and we make a path, and then we just get over and over and over again. And then all of a sudden this thing becomes iced over, and it becomes the craziest path of all time. You're not going anywhere else. That track is beaten in. You go down this hill, you're going down that track wherever it's going to take you. And that's kind of how we are as humans. We go over the same track, this scenario, our brains associated it, and then all of a sudden we're going down that track no matter what, until we consciously say, oh, okay, whoa, this isn't the track we're going down. We're going down over here. But this track isn't beaten in anymore, so it's not going to move fast like this track over here. We got to slowly work through this new track, and we got to choose it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Eventually, this track gets much more beaten down, and then the old track starts to get filled in a little bit. But if you go down that track again, you're flying down it just like you did before. And this is the concept of neuroplasticity, is we can form new connections. So that doesn't play out to learning just physical skills. It plays out to our internal environment. And so that we can create this new association of going down this hill over and over and over again, but it was still just an internal stimuli. Like it was this internal environment playing out to this external circumstance. When we move to exercise, it's very, very simple. This is real stress. This is physical stress. I like to look at it. It's like labor. Like this is manual labor. If you're not used to doing manual labor, you're going to have a hard time.
Yeah.
And our system is designed to not do more work than it needs to, because we used to be at a point where extra energy could put us into a place that we might starve. Like if we're going through a really big lean times per se, and then we're putting out more energy than necessary, then we could put ourselves in a negative place. So this is like our body is designed to try to avoid extra physical work. And now the internal environment or the external environment of society now is, if we really look at it, a lot of people are spending 12 hours a day as sitting. If exercise isn't a habit of yours or intentional training, and then you're working a physical job where maybe the most you're doing is standing, the worst case sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day, then you get in your car and maybe you sit for 30 minutes and then you go home and maybe you stand up and walk around your house. And then our leisure activities, watching TV, watching Netflix, we could spend the entire day not doing any physical labor. So if we have that pattern, let's say we didn't participate in sports, and then we moved into adulthood in our career, and then now we've been working for, let's say, a couple of years, a decade. No exercise over a decade. And I like to play this out. It happens like the frog in hot water thing. It's
Yeah.
like if you just throw somebody from like, let's say, having a lot of exercise to just sedentary, they're going to notice it. Same thing. If you
Yeah.
throw someone who's sedentary into a hard workout, stress response. And so it goes both ways. So you slowly get accustomed to sedentary, and then now you're trying to ram into workouts, and you are not accustomed to that physical stress. And let's just say we play it out to two perspectives: working really hard, really fast for a rest period, or not working too hard over a duration. Those are totally different stresses. And then you're going to start to get used to whatever the stress is. So when you first start, it's stress. It doesn't feel good. It's hard and long, and it's going for eternity. Like, when is this going to end? Versus extremely hard with a rest, and it's like, oh my god, this is stress. Like, I don't want to continue to do this. And then so all that physical work or internal work that you did to build new associations and click no 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 until you've created a new path is not going to play out to being able to tolerate new physical stress in like a manual labor type thing. And then so while you could do all the internal work possible, it could not play out to a good positive response for implementing exercise and nutrition strategies. And then they'll sort of ram together, which is why most people struggle with it, because then now you take this internal environment that's not very connected to exercise as a coping mechanism or positive nutritional strategies, and this internal association with certain things. And then now we take them and we're trying to put them into a new external stress.
Mhm.
So then now we have this internal and external environment converging, and then it's hard to continue, or it's hard to make a good strategy that you can adhere to. And what I would say is the proper or the popular understanding of how to implement strategies has some traps in it, which we'll discuss further down.
Sounds good. I really like that analogy about, tobogganing on the hill, and about how like when all the kids are going down the same track, it gets really slick and it's very easy to go down. But if you're wanting to like start a new trail, it's not going to feel good. It's not going to be fast. It's not going to be rewarding. It's like at first you're going to have resistance to it, right? Um, it's such a great analogy for, like you say, that brain plasticity, both in terms of like how we get into ruts and also the difficulty in changing, but that we absolutely can change and develop new pathways. Like there is hope in that analogy as well. I think that when we have the skill set for doing hard things mentally and emotionally, um, those the grit and determination that we learn doing that work can 100% translate over to the physical, but it's not intuitive. Like it doesn't happen automatically because, like you said, those physical stressors and what that does to our nervous system is a really different kind of stress. It's also when you're physically deconditioned. I have noticed this for my own journey, is that the more physically fit I have become, how my nervous system responds is different now. I am much more efficient or effective maybe at managing the physiological
Tolerant.
yeah, exactly, and we're tolerant to the physiological signals of stress, versus when I was first starting out, I wasn't tolerant to those things. And so all of your skills for emotion regulation are going to be super helpful, and there's also going to be some skills that are needed around, like you said, talking about the athlete that Steve Magnus used as an
Mm.
example in his book. Her issue wasn't with her physical machine. It wasn't with the car. It was the driver, right? And so in her case, there are sometimes some psychological tools that you may have in your arsenal that will absolutely play in. And I noticed this for me. In episode 2, we talked about the power of vulnerability by Dr. Brene Brown, and she talks about the shame gremlins that come up. And so for me, when I started working out in the gym, because mental, emotional, that was where I felt competent. Physical, I felt very incompetent. And so I had so much negative self-talk and self-criticism that was coming up. And so I had to then deploy my whole arsenal of psychological tools to wrestle with all of like the shame gremlins that were coming up through that process as well. So at the same time, I guess what I'm saying is that all of those tools that you have from the mental and emotional domain are absolutely going to serve you well as you start on a physical journey, but how they translate is not necessarily going to be intuitive from the start. And there are some new stresses that come in the physical domain that you also have to get accustomed to dealing with, and that it's only through kind of exposure. One of the other things that I find sometimes happens is that people who have a really high level of competence in another domain, so whether that's mental or emotional or
Mm.
both, when they have a high level of competence, sometimes their expectations for themselves in the other domains is also really high. They expect a high level of competence from themselves. We may sometimes see it, I see it in my work anyway, in people who used to be competent in something, have been away from it from a long time, expect themselves to be able to jump back in with the level of competence that they used to have. And so sometimes people set themselves up for a failure by expecting too much too soon from themselves, or expecting themselves to be competent in an area where they actually haven't done the foundational work to develop competence. And so again, it's about slow exposure to those things, and slowly easing into it is about how you build those new neural pathways and become more tolerant to the stresses that come along with engaging in physical endeavors.
Mm. Yes. I love all that because it's like it's interesting that it really does ram in so hard together, like this internal external environment. We're one, like it's just one when you really start. But then it's like we try to. It's almost like we try to conceptualize things as humans. We want to make sense of it, and it's easier to say physical freaking muscles like and brain, and it's like it's easier to try to separate these things, and but we're so one. What that made me think of, what's interesting is say a little bit of context about me is I rammed into training when I was about 13 years old, and I've been consistently training ever since. So now I'm 31, and then so I'm coming on It's like we're we're coming on some time with exercise as a positive coping mechanism for myself, and then it played out into a whole bunch of different things. For me, training started as an escape from home. It's like physical activity became a escape from the environment I was in, and then played out to goals and passions, and then working environments and
Yeah.
life purpose. But what I think is interesting is there was no emotional work done when I when I built a association with exercise. It's almost like the association with exercise was the work. And I'll touch on this, and then I have a question for you. Is but at one point I wasn't training. Like even when it happened younger, there was a point that I was not training. And what happened to me is a girl really hurt my feelings, and I was the skinny kid, and always that like that narrative in my mind. Oh, like I can picture social environments with a girl saying he's so skinny, and it's like, oh, that like that built a thing that then I went to war to be not skinny. But sure, it then I implemented exercise. My biggest challenge for me when I was younger was I used to say, okay, I just got to go 3 days. Because when I first started, it wasn't like I hit at 13 and then never looked back. When the first year or two of training had some ups and downs.
Hmm.
And I used to know that I made this association. I was like, if I go 3 days in a row, I'm going to be fine. And then I always found if I went to training 3 days in a row, it would be then easier to continue training and build up a little bit of consistency. So I used to hold on to that, whether there was parties going on, any events. I always in my mind, I was like, I got to go 3 days in a row. That gets the snowball going. And then I just don't stop. I just got to keep in. And that used to be what I used to think about when I was younger. And it worked out when I was like, and every time one of those ups and downs, I would work out 3 days in a row, but I would build this momentum, and we'll talk about it further down. But for me, I had an internal environment that was played out to external stuff, that I developed a positive coping mechanism with exercise. And the foundational principle to making it happen was I just had to do it no matter what. It was like 3 days in a row. The world could be burning and I would have to go to the gym. I could be sore, whatever. I used to imagine 3 days in a row, and it worked pretty good when I was younger. But for you, it's interesting is, and I know a lot about your fitness journey
You
because
do.
of my our relationship, but it's interesting is you did have these ups and downs, and they never led to a permanent like this. When say my story at the beginning was like this, and it never stopped, and it was always this pattern had been built in. But you had this up and down over time, which that reflects the norm. The From what I see, and I meet a lot of people trying to implement exercise and nutritional strategies, this up and down is the norm. So with you, this is a really good question. Do you feel like the emotional work you did over key points in your life when exercise wasn't a consistent pattern for you played out into positive strategies to handle adding exercise or nutritional interventions in later on? Because you had times where you tried exercise before you became what you are now, but then over the say you've been now 2 years locked in. High five on that. So we're 2 years locked in. Did that emotional work in the in between play out into a situation that allowed you to better handle everything that was the broad sphere of adding exercise and nutrition interventions and actually being successful?
Yes. And I'm just reflecting on my journey. I think that, so yes, it absolutely, the things that I was learning, I think that part of it was about what it takes to adopt this lifestyle and then sustain it over time is like some of this, like some of the things I have learned about mental and emotional work is about the things like regulating my emotions to be able to do the hard things and dealing with the shame
Mm,
gremlins when they come up. Like those are really, really important. But other important pieces of it that I think contributed to why I wasn't as consistent and kind of fell off the wagon at earlier points in my life is that it's also about maintaining this lifestyle is about figuring out how do I fit it in the bigger picture of my lifestyle, juggling all of the things that
mm,
are important to me and that I'm interested in. So like work and relationships and social life and hobbies and meal prep and all of that stuff. Each of those different components, you need to figure out how to fit it into your life. And then each of those components is kind of its own problem to solve in terms of like, how do I get my sleep sorted? How do I get enough water? Am I getting enough steps? Am I eating right? What does right look like? Because there's 1,000 different diets or like ways of eating that you could follow, which is the right one for me. And so in those in between phases, like it wasn't just about the mental and emotional work. Sometimes the mental and emotional piece of, I guess, what I'm describing is also just the ability to manage complexity and manage juggling multiple priorities in your life and managing your time. Like there's some foundational skills that I would classify these more in the mental rather than the emotional, but they're like life skills about like how do you juggle your life. But it's also things like, our mental skills are also things like budgeting and managing your finances as a really important mental skill, not really related to your emotions or your physical directly, but like
mm.
indirectly. Like I don't see them as separate domains. Like they really are integrated. Does that answer the question I've
Yeah,
been asked?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it does. Because a little context for everybody that I was Petrina's personal trainer.
Yeah.
It really makes me think of our very first conversation where you said I can't do 3 times a week. I said,
Yeah.
okay, we can do two, but we're gonna talk about three because two's not enough. But right
Yes.
now, it's enough. This is
Yeah.
enough currently. And then what it makes me think of that there, because I always like to try to find the success indicator in these, because if everybody fails, why doesn't everybody fail? It means
Yeah.
that and it's not like 1%. It's like there's big groups of people who are successful, and you can in fact be freaking fit. Like
Yeah.
it's not impossible.
Absolutely.
Um, it makes me think of that second conversation.
Yeah.
So I can't remember what the timeline was. Maybe it was
I,
2 months. I don't know
I
how
do.
long.
So
How?
when you and I had that first conversation where I was like, I can only do 2 days a week, that was in October. And then it was in January. So we'd been working together. Really, I guess I
Yeah,
committed to
three
the full
months.
contract in like November. So it was like
Mm.
November, December, and then it was January we came back and you sat me down and had what I refer to as a come to Jesus conversation, which is like, okay, Petrina, like your goals are really achievable, but I need you to give
Mm.
me a third day. And I remember my response at that point was like, I don't have the
I
time.
can't.
Like I'm just overloaded. And you're like,
Yeah,
you have the time. You can do this. Figure it
yeah,
out.
yeah,
And I
it's
remember you
funny.
saying just like, figure it out. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh.
Well, it's funny. It's funny about that conversation that I think we could move to the next one, but I think this is really valuable because I said, okay, two's enough. Two, that's fine.
At first.
That is
At first.
important because we didn't give you too much. We
Yes.
gave you enough to currently manage in your obligations of this complicated thing that is life.
Yeah.
And then in January, I said, your goals are attainable. I said, but this isn't enough anymore. Like
Yeah.
you've got the habits there, but you need more training. And I remember the analogy it made me think of, I can't remember what made my brain. He said, I can't do it. And I said, Petrina, you can do it. You're just not making it the priority. And then you're not working around it. And I brought up the story about when I got to New Zealand. So I did a work internship. I got to live in New Zealand. That was awesome. But the first thing I did, and even before I got there, is I found out where I lived. And I didn't have a car when I first got there. I found out where I lived, what was the best bus station in the area to then get to the university where I lived, and where was the closest gym. And I said, you know what, a gym by the house, the university, or the bus station is mandatory. I decided the bus station because it would work best on the transitions. So first thing I did before I even got there, I war planned the most efficient way to get to the gym because I knew that would be a barrier because I didn't have a car. And I remember I didn't even really timestamp this story. It was part of my rant of, Petrina, you got to give me another day. And then you brought it up way after that. And then you said that that was the moment you realized it was part of my identity, that
Yeah.
me being training was like, I didn't even think, oh, I'm going to take some rest for a couple months. It was, no, what's the most efficient way? Like you described, as I made that part of what I was doing. And then now we got Petrina. She's giving me 6. So it's like, that's a big difference. And I think that's really interesting to note because it tells us 2 things. It's like you started with something that was manageable in the
Hmm.
busy life that you have.
Yeah.
And then you started to address when you needed more. And then you made it part of your identity. And now I would say you're busier than you were back then. And you give me 5 to 6 days a week. So it's like, that's a big success indicator.
It's huge. And it's funny, we both have these shared memories of those conversations because it was a really important conversation. I think it'll transition us into what we want to talk about next, but it's those 2 principles of like, start with what feels achievable. You're not looking to overwhelm yourself. And so at the time for me, 2 felt like I was pushing my comfort zone. It really did feel like a push. I couldn't do 3 at first, but my capacity shifted pretty quickly. That when you asked me the second time, just a couple of months later, my initial reaction was no, but then you were like, it's not really no anymore, Petrina. And I was like, oh shit, you're right. The second piece of that was that story. Like, you were very generous about sharing your own personal experiences with me. And I think it's what really helped me flip that switch and connect to like, oh, this isn't something Nate does. It's who Nate is. And I need to adopt that too, that it's not something Petrina does. It's who I am. Um, and then I was also confronting a whole bunch of other things because adding the third day meant there were 2 days a week I was working out with you, but there 1 day a week I had to go by myself.
Mhm.
And that was brought up anxiety and all of that stuff. But I mean, that was my own idiosyncratic journey. But the principles of starting reasonable and making it part of your identity, I think, are really important. Did you want to say something before we segue into the next section?
Well, the one I was like, that's when the internal mashed up, because
Yes.
that's a very common thing, is gym anxiety. And there's not everybody had positive associations built with other human beings and exercise, and it is a massive obstacle, which is I think part of this stuff we'll sort of go over. But I think it's interesting because it does play out into a lot of this stuff on how it's all one, but then you have to take care of part 2 to exercise. Like, it's like there's like, you could do the most emotional work of all time, but then there might be emotional related work to implementing exercise and nutrition things, like reward based eating. And that
Yeah.
we see like people who have just lower body weights on a research side, if we're going to quote some research, tend to just not have eating as an emotional coping strategy. They're more likely to go for a walk for stress than to reward themselves with food. And small calorie surpluses can add up to big things over time.
Yeah.
And so what it makes me think, it's like, you could do all the emotional work you want, but there might be emotional work related to adding the training. So
100% there
you
is.
can contemplate the training all you want, but we got to get into the gym, and we got to deal with all the stresses related to getting into the gym, or those eating habits that are getting in the way. But I think that's the
Absolutely.
perfect transition.
It is. So, okay, now that we've talked about the struggle, let's talk about what our experiences have told us about how people can get started. What are some general principles that help people to get started? And I think first I want to, as we segue into this, I also just want to validate for my friend Joe, who was very generous about reaching out and asking these questions and admitted to having some real struggles with this. I just want to validate that it is, again, such a normal thing to struggle with this, that you are not alone, and that this is the more common experience that people have is struggling with changing eating habits and getting started on a journey toward more improved physical health, which may or may not include gym.
Yeah, no, I think it's a challenge. Like it is. Don't let social media guide you away. Like, it's a challenge and it's getting much, much worse. And it's like we could talk about all these things going on in our society right now, but obesity was a national epidemic 10 years ago now,
Yeah.
and it's only gotten worse. Like,
Yeah.
it's much worse. And now people like to, I think this builds the construct that'll answer the question, but people like to look at BMI as just not accurate, and it's misunderstanding concepts. Is that it nothing related to anything else. If you just the research on BMI, people die earlier with higher BMIs. Now, on a societal section, BMI is really good. It's just okay, people are getting heavier. Regardless, it's not they're getting taller and more muscular. People are getting much, much heavier. Society, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And then so then if we go one layer deeper and then we start associating, so let's bring this in, is okay, not BMI, but height to weight with waist
Hmm.
starts to change the story. And then if we really like start talking about, people sometimes will quote research, oh, there's research showing that um, heavy weight isn't associated with health outcomes. And those are just studies where they didn't take muscle mass into consideration, where muscle mass is the protecting factor. You could be
Yeah.
heavier, but if you have more muscle mass, you're going to have better health outcomes.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we see here is the fishbowl we're in is bad, like, and it's getting worse. So you when you talk to a fish and it's in, let's say if we talk to fish and it's in a bowl of toxic water, we don't blame the fish.
No.
But we're not fish. We're
Yeah.
human beings, and we can perceive things and we can make changes. But the reason I want to preface this is it's hard and it's getting harder. We're in an environment that's not as hospitable to fit human beings, and that's just how it is. Now, we could complain about the weather or we could put on a freaking jacket. So let's talk about the 20% then.
Yeah.
So if we have that 80% of people are going to be unsuccessful, and we have 20% that's successful, well, what is the struggle to get those 80% to the 20%? And then there's a couple real simple things that even just how we've talked here is I want you to think of point one is exercise and nutrition intervention, not rammed into exercise program boot camp, because we see most people who make the drastic changes then in 6 months are heavier than when they started in plan B, input biggest loser being ineffective.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking about the popular demand is ineffective, with struggling to start, the biggest thing is putting in an exercise and nutrition intervention that is actually doable for you, because well, maybe some of us are, but it's like you're not a teenager and then maybe you're not retired. It's like most of us are somewhere in
Somewhere in the
between,
middle.
and that's complicated. We're working 2 jobs, we got families, we have careers. There's very taxing things in our life, but then our life is a little bit more cognitive, internal related stress than external. Things are crazy. We can perceive our financial situation in like 20 years now. It's not about survival today and getting enough
Yeah.
food. So the struggles to start are really just laying into an intervention that is manageable. And then that starts the snowball. It's like if we can have an intervention, exercise and nutrition, that is manageable for us, we get the snowball rolling. And like with you had already started some things on your own. You were tracking protein, you were tracking calories, and then now you're coming to the gym 2 times a week. So one of the things you did is you had interventions to your lifestyle that were hospitable to the direction you wanted to go in. And then so implementing an exercise and nutritional intervention that's manageable, but then you got to really clearly see where you want to go. What are we talking about here? Are we imagining muscle mass? Are we imagining how we feel in an environment? Are we weak? We want to get stronger. Are we bigger and we want to get lighter? We got to conceptualize where we want to go, and we want to see it very, very, very specifically. So let's say, take the example of you perspective wise and just bringing down body weight.
Yep.
That was the first goal. Okay. We start with steps. So we got steps down. We started tracking calories, how much food is going in, how much exercise from just not going to the gym, an easy way, in, out. That's step one. In, out. Like, how many calories are we taking in and how much exercise is going out? And we don't got to get it to the fine to the line of it, but we got to know that we're trying to lose weight. And then we got to put the most doable thing that we can actually adhere to over time. Everything else is secondary. Once we have that, and if you're anywhere else on the continuum and you haven't done those two things, we haven't put an exercise intervention that we can do over time, and we haven't made like a nutrition intervention. So with you, let's think the simplest thing ever, steps and calories. Mm-hmm. We're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. If we're thinking about anything else and those two things we haven't started with, we're going to have a problem. Now, we could start much, much past that if we're somebody who's built some things past that. But if we're looking at struggles to start, that's what we have to start with first.
Yeah. I think I would also put in the caveat that, like you say, if you're more advanced than that, then you can absolutely ramp up the challenge on that. Like if you're already at the gym, you don't have to back it up and just do steps. And at the same time, if hearing Nate talk about like, oh, Petrina started tracking her calories and her steps, and that feels overwhelming, then just start with a walk. Because where I started from, when Nate met me, I was already doing some things, but that's not where I started from. I started from being incredibly sedentary and very deconditioned. And I started from just, I had a step counter, but I wasn't aiming for a specific number of steps per day. What I started with was, in addition to whatever incidental steps I was getting through my life and my work, I needed to start taking a daily walk on purpose for the intention of getting additional activity every day. And it didn't matter how many steps it was. It could be just for 10 minutes. The pace didn't matter. It was just that I had to take an intentional walk every day. And thinking about like some of the principles you talked about, where like when you were trying to get restarted, you were like, I have to go 3 days in a row. For me, my principle was that I needed to go on an intentional walk every day, more days than I didn't per week. And that if I missed one, I could never miss 2 in a row. So it was like, if I went once and then I missed one, it's like, okay, you can miss one, but then you absolutely must go the next day. You can't miss 2 in a row. And in that way was just aiming to get more often than not in the course of a week that I was getting out for an intentional walk. And by doing that, it meant that like I could walk at my own pace and at a distance or at a time that just fit in my schedule, or that was also matched where my fitness level was at. Like I was very, very deconditioned when I began. And so like if somebody is in that place too, like don't underestimate the power of those small habits, because what I have learned over time, that I've always, I think one of the things that worked really well in terms of how you coached me in those early days is that you really praised me for my consistency with things, because I learned that it's like, if you want to, the way water wears down stone over time isn't by blasting into it all at once. It's by small drips of water persistently over time, just drip, 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 and you can erode stone with dripping water. And that's kind of the philosophy that I was taking towards my the steps on my journey. Keep it simple, but keep it consistent as all get out.
Yeah, I really like that, because it's like, if we're not thinking about that, we're missing it. Because it's like, we could start out the race however hard, and we could not. And it's like the most simple, logically, it goes back to the tail of the tail of the tortoise and the hare. Like it's like it's the most simple principle ever, that it's like, we have to make it the whole race. And with fitness, it's a life sentence.
Yes.
You don't get fit and then stop. Like, no. You are a physical product of your environment. So if you're overweight, it's not because of your genes, it's
Yeah.
because we're not in the environment that we had to be fit. Like, we are consuming over time more energy than we're putting out.
Yeah.
Just like if you want to be muscular, like it's like if you take somebody who's muscular, it's like, okay, this gym guy, cool, he's at the gym, but no. He's in a like an external or an environment that's that's hospitable to growing muscle. And that could be he just loves the gym, he loves lifting weights. It's like, this is a life sentence. So
Yeah.
whatever we're doing, we have to figure out how to do it, and consistently. Because we could have a year and we could start in 3 months, and then we could not do good 3 months, 6 months. We could start it again. And over 12 months, we could be in the same place at square one, and it's been a whole year later. So if we're not thinking consistently, and that could be whatever, it could be wherever we're on the line, and then we have to have a very clear conceptualized goal. We got to focus on doing it consistently, and then we have to put an intervention in for exercise and nutrition that you're able to be consistent with and adhere to over time, that is manageable in your current lifestyle. And what I would add, one thing on top of that, is the why has to be there, because there is going to be obstacles. There's going to be reasons to not go. And if we can't clearly conceptualize why this means something to us, we're going to stop.
Yeah. 100%. Um, I remember when the thing that got me going back to the gym was that at the time I was experiencing a lot of physical pain because of the state that I was in. And I knew, I kind of had these thoughts like, it had gotten to the point where it was so bad. I had a lot of pain in my hips, and that I was sleeping with ice packs on my hips because there was no amount of painkillers that was making it go away. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I would pay any amount of money in the world to make this pain go away. And the frustration of that was that knowing that there is no miracle cure that I could have paid for to make it go away, what I had to do was change my life. And I knew that that was the thing. And so it was like, okay, if I'm in a place where I would pay any amount of money to make this go away, then that tells me just how big a priority it is and that I need to shift and change things. So I do think like figuring out your why, and it doesn't have to be, you don't wait until you're in the state that I was in, because I think, you know, going back to that adage of like, a healthy person has 1,000 problems, but an unhealthy person has one problem, right? Don't wait until you have the one problem, but put it on the list of your priorities. And then really consider your life and your lifestyle and what's important to you. Like if it's aging well, if it's about wanting to be there for your family, if it's about being able to play with your kids, if it's about just wanting to feel better in your own body like I did, right? There's lots of reasons that we might want to reconnect with that. And you know what? Sometimes they say like, don't do it for vanity reasons. Like, but to hell with that. Like if that's motivating to you, then do it for vanity reasons, right? But figuring out your why can also be super helpful. I think one last thing you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Oh, of course, I always got something to say. Yeah. What I was going to say on that is, vanity, like like feel like look good, feel good,
Yeah.
and you're gonna have more confidence. You exist in the world better. Like it's just but it's not vanity too. It's like if we
No.
have more muscle mass, we're gonna age better, and we're
Yeah.
gonna have higher qualities of life. And it's like input. If I was like, maybe I'll make a reel on this. I'm going to input the cross section of the thigh of the 70-year-old who is a triathlete and the 70-year-old who is sedentary. It's like, man, it's like our external environment is not hospitable to physical qualities anymore. And so it has to be a habit. And then so it's like, if it has to be a habit, you gotta have a strong why on that habit. And I think it's really interesting that you talk on that. I have a quick one on that. Is it like, what's really interesting is you're only a couple years younger than my mom would have been right now. And it's funny because it goes into my why as a coach per se.
Yeah.
And you're one of my proudest coaching stories. We'll go on that. The wait, my camera's tripping out. I'm just gonna come back for a second. Oh, whatever. The is you're one of my proudest coaching wise because you're only a couple years younger than my mother would have been, and my mother did not have exercise as a habit. She struggled with obesity her whole life. She had degenerate arthritis in her back and hips, and she wasn't going to make it to 60, and she passed away at 56 per se.
Wow.
And what's really powerful about that is what you said there is sedentary related pain is real. And there's a lot of people right now who are going to doctors in the medical system to get prescribed painkillers because of pain that is what's the word I'm looking for? Pain that doesn't have a reasonable backing. They don't know exactly why the pain is there. And I think that's a really powerful one because at some point we're going to have a decline, and that decline, if we're the fittest version of ourselves, is just going to not be as drastic, and we're going to maintain quality of life much better over time. And it's a really specific why to be able to think on not duration of life, but quality of
Quality.
life. And wherever you are now, I reckon if you're listening to this, you're not 75, maybe you're 75, cool. It's like, but even at 75, we can make a difference. That 75-year-olds make similar resistance training benefits to 18-year-olds. So
Yeah.
it's like, there's no excuse. You're not too gone. If we start now, we're going to be in a great place to move forward. And your life is literally on the line. Like your quality of life is on the line. And then so if we start, it's at all cost. If you're not exercising right now, you need to start. And we need to have it as a life sentence and how we start and how it can affect us over time. And we got to hit it. It's like our life is on the line. And you never told me that ice bag hip story, which is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so true. And like, if you want to talk about what the research says on the positive side, I doubt, like you said, I doubt many of our listeners are in the older age range. And yet, if you're out there, there's lots of really fantastic research about the benefits of strength, like resistance training for older folks. Even if you have never done it before in your life, begin now, because you, like Nate said, you can make the same kind of gains that we would expect from a younger person. And it is literally the fountain of youth. Your skeletal muscle and building up your lean tissues, it leads to better independence. It leads to better stress management. It leads to lower all-cause mortality. All-cause mortality is lower the more muscle that you have. Your ability to rebound from illness or accident and injury is better the more muscle you have on your body. And so, yeah, if anybody is struggling for finding a why, there's lots of good research that shows some really powerful health reasons why you'd want to invest in this. I feel like there's so much more we could say, Nate, but I know we talked about wanting to keep this one short, so I'm going to move on. I think that in summary, if you had to summarize, what are some practical takeaways that our listeners could consider when they are starting on their own journey to improve their physical health? What are some specific practical takeaways?
Okay. All right. Practical takeaways here. So for me, maybe it's just like my abstract brain, but I've helped a lot of people be successful on this. And there's some commonalities over time that I've noticed working from show competitors to people trying to just implement new lifestyle factors. And there's very, very specific reason I praised you for those habits because they matter.
Yeah.
You do not praise the outcome, and in your brain, do not praise your outcome. Praise the effort you're making in related to the outcome. Reward yourself for that effort. Matters because you're not always going to be able to just like get to this very, very specific point. Sometimes it's possible, but sometimes it's not. But we want to be somewhere in related to that thing. And we really want to focus on things that are going to keep us consistent over time. And so some practical takeaways is that you need to understand exactly where you want to go. And what I like to call this is needs, goals, time frame. This matters. Shout out Good Life. This is one of the things that I really implemented this over time, but it really matters. Needs, goals, time frame. So what do you need? Like, what are you looking for? Better energy, more muscle mass. I can see my abs. I can walk upstairs properly. I want to be stronger. I want to be more sexually appealing. Whatever it is, it could be anything, but we need to understand what you're seeking. And then we got to have a goal for it. So let's just play into something less broad or long term, like more lean tissue as you age. But let's just think you want to be more confident per se. That's the real why to why you
Yeah.
want to be more muscular. So say more confidence is the thing. Okay. So to be more confident, what does that look like? So let's say we want to lose some body fat and we want to increase some muscle mass. Very simple principles. So now we want to lose some body fat and increase some muscle mass. Okay. To be more confident. Okay, so then now we start to conceptualize a goal out of this. Okay, so if we're, say, sitting at 220 pounds, and then our body fat percentage is 40, and then so let's say we got to get under 20% body fat to just start to see some visible muscle. We're not shredded per se. And this is a good conceptualize for everybody. 20, you're going to see some muscles. 15, you're lean. Under 10, you're like shredded. Under 5, you're bodybuilding stage ready. But so let's say we're trying to get under 20% body fat, and then we're sitting at 220. So let's say we just theorize that we need to get your lean body mass up to somewhere like 140 pounds per se, and we want to get you sub 200. The very specifics don't matter, but the goal does, because now we start to see a goal. So, okay, I need to lose 40 pounds of body weight, and I need to gain, let's say, 15 pounds of muscle mass. So I need to really only fluctuate, let's say 30 pounds. Okay, now we got a goal, 12 months. So needs, goals, time frame. What do you want? Is the goal out of it? And then how long is it going to take to get that goal? Let's say we want to lose, let's say that 30 pounds, and then we're just breaking it out to about a pound a week over 52 weeks. We could get there before a year is up. Okay, now we know where we're going. So then now we have to implement a nutrition and exercise strategy that is manageable for our lifestyle, like in all of our demands. And then we want to adhere to it no matter what. And whether
Yeah.
it's 3 days in a row or Petrina's, you can't miss that second day. If we just have where you want to go, a realistic intervention to get there, and then consistency,
Hmm.
you're going to get somewhere. And then that's just going to evolve over time. And I would really highly recommend, if you're not somebody who's seen success before, that you look at some sort of human resource that's not the internet. Like whether it's hiring a personal trainer, a coach, somebody. I've been a coach for 10 years now, and I've worked with another coach for most of them. It's like we need to have these resources because we're in the information age. And this is one of the other practical takeaways. We're in the information age. You're going to get 20,000 opinions and 10,000 different directions. And it's all bollocks because it doesn't apply to you specifically. So if we don't have this plan made to you specifically, we're going to struggle. So if we take a sum, and then I'll let you add your tidbits on it with just practical takeaways for exercise. We got to know where we're going, and it needs to be specific and why we want to get there. And then we need to put an exercise and nutrition intervention that's manageable for us. And then we really need to be consistent on it over time. And I highly recommend working with another human being who's helped people get there, because then they can sort of funnel that information down to a specific measurable approach, and we can start moving towards it.
I would agree with that. I think like not everybody can necessarily like afford to hire a trainer. And so like I can appreciate that. But the value of finding some kind of social support for it. So whether it's joining, like hiring your personal trainer, hiring an online coach, going to like a gym that has classes that they do so that there's some sort of social accountability
Community
for
of
your
it.
showing up community exactly
Mm.
can be super helpful. Because as you say, we live in the age of information. A lack of information is not the reason people are not changing, because all the information is there at your fingertips. But it's the reason why I, as a therapist, and you as a coach are still in business, is because the information alone isn't getting to get people where they need to go. I think my own suggestions, um, both from my own experience and also like as a therapist and what I know about behavior change, because I don't coach people in fitness like Nate does, but I help people with making lots of other habit and behavior changes, is to start small, way, way smaller than you think. Like whatever the smallest change you can make is, that is like, it's going to be a little uncomfortable, but it still feels doable. But it feels like it might be so small that I'm not even sure it's going to make a difference. It will. The time and consistency is what will make the difference. And so pick whatever is the smallest thing and just do that and keep doing it on repeat until you feel like you've got the bandwidth to take on the next thing, and do that until you've got bandwidth and then take on the next thing. Really see each of those changes as something you're adopting as part of your identity, that you do these things because it's who you are, not because it's something you do. It's not something you're going to do for 12 weeks or until you lose the weight or until the wedding. It's something you do forever. This is who you are now. So that identity shift is really important. And then the last piece I would say is about, you need to have some kind of accountability to yourself. You can have accountability to another person too, if that's helpful, but really you need to be accountable and honest with yourself about what your situation is in a very compassionate and non-judgmental way. And so what I mean by that is you need to face your own reality of like getting a step tracker and seeing what is the reality of how much I am moving each day, getting on the scale and seeing the reality of what is my weight right now, starting tracking your food. And again, I actually didn't start tracking my food right away. I didn't start tracking my food until probably like February. So Nate and I started working together in October. I started the third day in January. It wasn't until February that I started tracking. And when I started tracking, I wasn't even trying to hit a particular calorie target. I was just learning the habit of tracking my food. And then based on that information, was able to make some really smart evidence-based adjustments and had real, that's when my success really took off. And it was hard to do. I resisted doing it. I didn't want to confront the truth of what was going in. But I have found the more I track those things and do it non-judgmentally, I don't criticize myself for any of it. The number on the scale isn't connected to my worth. The foods that I put in, I don't shy away from, like, if I go out and I have like margaritas and nachos with my husband, it's going in the tracker because I'm just being honest about the truth of what's going on. But that has given me such freedom because now I'm not dealing with like any shame around those things. I'm not guessing at where I'm at. I know exactly where I am, and that I can live a lifestyle that includes margaritas and tacos, and I still get to lose weight and be fit and have a life that I love. So whatever technology and tools help you with just kind of acknowledging the truth of where you are so you're not guessing about it, and that you can then start using all of those mental and emotional skills that you have learned for grit and determination in those domains and apply them to how you see your physical self. It's like using the car and the driver analogy. Sometimes the car, like if the car is malfunctioning, the driver's got to get out of the car and lift up the hood and take a peek at what's going on under there. You can't just go like, I guess like the squirrels aren't running as efficiently as they used to, and I got to get some new squirrels for my car. It's like, no, you got to look up. There's no squirrels in the car. That's not how it runs. You need to start really just kind of taking an honest look about where you are and understanding a little bit better how your systems run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of does fit in I'll just give a shout out to like MyFitnessPal. Like there's an unpaid version, huge database. You can put in the brand of food, the amount, cooked, uncooked. You can kind of map it out. Think with a practical takeaway. And it's sometimes you have to know how much energy is going in. That's a non-negotiable. There's no fit person on the planet who doesn't know that in some sense. But then as they get better at it, they can do more intuitive things. When you start, you can't intuitive.
No.
This is well known that people consume about 1,500 calories more than they think they are. And a pound of fat is 3,500 calories-ish. And then so if we're thinking that just 500 calories extra every day is a pound of fat over a week, that's 52 pounds of fat over a year. It that plays out really simply. You
Yeah.
need to know how much energy is going in, and you got to figure it out. That's just the brass tacks. You got to have somebody. You got to find some resources. You got to learn the skills. You have to know how much energy is going in, and then there's some skills on the outside for training. We don't really have to know exactly how much energy is going out with training. That's not as specific. Like, it matters, but how to track that can be, I'd say, a little bit not as important, because a 500 calorie workout is a shit fest. So just focusing on trying to train 500 calories, I would say more know how much energy is going out or in, and then you just start training, and you just have to implement a training. Let's say it starts out 2 days a week. Let's say it starts out with steps. It just has to be something we could hear over time.
Hmm.
And if we can adhere to it over time, and it's generally moving us in the right direction, and we know why, and we just do it consistently, we're just going to get better over time. And then if you reference the right people, they can help you out.
Absolutely. I think maybe we will attach some resources, I think, to this episode. Maybe not attach them, but like if anybody is interested in additional resources, like in terms of like what apps are Nate and I using, what other books have we read, who are some reliable sources of information on the internet that we have referred to ourselves, then, drop a comment and let us know, and we will be happy to, like, we're not gatekeeping any of it. We will share all of our knowledge with you.
I
Um,
want you to be successful, and we will do
exactly.
whatever we have to do.
Exactly. Um, any final thoughts before we wrap it up, Nate?
No, I think, yeah, no, I think I'm pretty good. I think there's like that we could just rant on this topic. So no, I think we got some good points there.
Awesome. Okay. In that case, I want to send a big heartfelt thank you to my friend Joe for his comment and his question. And certainly, if there's anybody else out there who has questions about this topic or anything else, we talked about Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus in episode 1. We also talked about the power of vulnerability. So we got into a whole lot more of that mental and emotional work in episode 2 with Power of Vulnerability by Dr. Brene Brown. If anybody has questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. It's what Nate and I are here for.
Yes, and I'm going to reference anybody who thought there was value in this question. Would love the next episode, because we're going to be discussing The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. And this is specifically about the environment we're in. And I think there's some very tangible takeaways that play really well into this that we'll be discussing in that one, because it's about the environment and how certain things are playing out into what is the crisis of comfort and continued, would say, undesirable health outcomes increasing over time. And there's lots of good tangible takeaways for it. Now, you can connect with me at Nate Bolding on I would say Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, if you'd like. And those are the socials you can connect with me. And Petrina, where can our listeners find you on the internet?
Our listeners can find me at Petrina Calder on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok, although not as active. But we also have an Instagram and TikTok account for the podcast. So if you can also find us at The Creatures We Become. We are currently making the podcast available on Spotify. It's confirmed now. We also have it available on Apple Podcasts and YouTube.